Hi, investors. Nick Garner here from Investmore. And today we've got Hosanna Ho, who is a very experienced and successful solicitor specializing in conveyance, family, and immigration. And she's going to be talking to us about freehold versus leasehold. Useful topic. Anyway, if you do like this video, please press the like button. And if you want to see more of this, please subscribe. All right, let's get into it. Hey everyone, Nick Arno here from Investmore, and today I'm really fortunate to have Hosanna Ho with me, who's a solicitor. She'll tell you a little bit more about herself just very shortly, but the plan is we're going to talk about leasehold versus freehold for terraced properties, semi-detached, and to some degree apartments and stuff. But anyway, Hosanna, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, no problem, of course. Hello everyone, 你好，大家好. My name is Hosanna Ho. I originally come from Hong Kong and I came to this country back to year 1998, a long time ago. And I finished my degree here and I complete my legal training in this country. And I qualify in year 2009. I base in London and I specialize in property, immigration, and family law.
Very good. There's lots of interesting topics here, but
Indeed.
hopefully, if people want us back for more, we'll talk about more stuff. But let's
Sure.
let's talk about the freehold versus leasehold
Mm.
topic. So, just in short, on with Investmore, we deal with a lot of Hong Kong investors, for example, and there seems to be almost an obsession with getting hold of or acquiring freehold properties.
Mm.
And for local property people, people like Jamie, Dave, who we work with, who are based in Manchester, they aren't concerned about leasehold at all, particularly. It's just to them, it's not a problem. So it would be really helpful if you could just talk us through leasehold versus freehold for terraced houses and semi-detached houses, so people just understand how this works and what the pitfalls are, and how to take advantage of the situation once you have this knowledge.
Sure, no problem. And I think the major difference between freehold and leasehold property are basically the term of the ownership. So basically for freehold, you literally own the ownership, you own the property for indefinite period. And for leasehold, even if that loan lease lasts for 999 years, there's still a fixed term there. And you won't be able to call it like a definite term. So I think the major difference is just the term of the ownership in relation to the difference between leasehold and freehold. And obviously, after a certain amount of time for leasehold, and you basically, on paper, you will need to return the property to the ultimate landlord of that piece of land. But yeah, so I think major difference is the term of the ownership.
People are afraid of leaseholds because they're afraid of being taken advantage of. Is there a reasonable likelihood that you could end up paying large service charges or large ground rents or whatever?
If you're buying a flat, and obviously there are some there's some leasehold houses. They are not subject to ground rent or service charge as well. But if you're talking about a flat with the leasehold, yes, there will be a possibility that the landlord or the block management will increase the ground rent or like increase the service charge. But according to the law, I mean, as a leaseholder, you can always take further action against the decision of like if they increase, significantly the high rent, ground rent or the service charge.
Okay,
So, mm,
I get the impression that people are just afraid to buy a leasehold terraced house, for example, because
mm,
they don't know what's in the lease, which is a problem.
mm,
So before making a commitment, they have no idea what's in there, and they are afraid of being taken advantage of. So can you just talk us through the real threat of problematic acquisition if you buy a leasehold terraced house up in the north of England?
it's not. just for like different kind of houses, semi-detached houses or terrace house. It all depends on the lease itself. So, for example, there will be different maintenance costs there. There will be different. There will be a different restriction saying that in this kind of property, you will have to at certain year, then you will have to do certain work, maintenance work, pay maintenance costs, or like how you're gonna prepare that in the way that the landlord wants. I think the problem we have now is people just don't really pay attention on what kind of restrictive covenant that they have in the leases. And for some solicitor, okay, they complete the transaction, but they often didn't really tell the client, look, this is a situation. So once you become the owner, you will have to pay extra attention on those restrictive covenant. And people in Hong Kong specifically or in Asia, they're not familiar with the term of restrictive covenant. All they know is, okay, I own the house, I can do whatever I want, I can do anything I want, and that's the concept that they have in Hong Kong. But I think this is something that they need to learn when they come into this country, because obviously England is a very old country, and they own the land like back to 100 years ago, Queen's time, put it this way, or like before the World War. So there will be loads of restrictive covenant stick with the land, a piece of land that the owner will have to just basically follow the law and make sure that they will not breach the restrictive covenant during the ownership. I think that bit, the most solicitor, they just didn't really advise the client properly, or like they didn't really mention it at the report on title. So that's why once the buyer they complete the transaction, obviously they're happy, they got the key, they do their own work, but they didn't really recognize it when they actually are in breach
Okay.
of of the restrictive covenant.
If we just take a standard two-bedroom terraced house in the north of England that's on a leasehold, and we talk about restrictive covenants. So the very first thing is, what is a restrictive covenant? Because not everyone will know this.
Well, basically, more like a restriction that you cannot do, you just cannot do, or you have to do during your ownership. For example, like what I said before, you have to pay certain costs to do the repairing work,
Yeah,
and you have to repair the fence or like the gate or the boundary every 7 years, or you cannot install a satellite dish outside your house.
right.
That kind of restriction that we're talking about, and it's rather often that people just don't know. Not that they don't pay attention; they simply don't know about that. So this is something that when I usually advise my client, I will literally tell them that this is what you need to pay attention once you become the owner.
Okay. And again, just taking our example property, two-bedroom terraced house in the north of England, they they will typically have restrictive covenants on them, and there'll be certain obligations around maintenance
Yes.
and just, well, maintenance is upkeep. And what about, for example, ground rent or other gotchas that mean that the owner of this two-bedroom leasehold house, for example, would have to pay out on?
It all depends on what they put at the lease, for example. But usually, for that kind of property, you would not expect a lot of a high ground rent for that. You would not expect that. High ground rent, from my experience, right, up until now, you will see only on those new build, new development. But on like Terrace House, I think the ground rent is rather low, very low, and usually you would not have any problem when you have like with mortgage, or if you want to sell it. That is not a problem at all.
And when you talk about low ground rent, what does that actually mean? Like, what number are we talking about?
How about less than £100 sometimes?
Okay.
Like less than £100, or maximum, like the one that I just did last week, just complete with like £120. So it's really a lot, really a lot. And that is like you have to pay like once a year, not every month.
What is the process, let's say, for somebody to make sure that they're not walking into trouble when buying a leasehold property like this, a two-bedroom terraced house or semi-detached or whatever?
Okay, it's difficult to find out the problem from the beginning of the deal. We when we we will usually find out the problem, like when we actually start to read through the title paper and start to read through the deed. That's how we call it. And then that will be the time that we come out and tell the client, look, these are the restrictive covenant. Usually they are fine. Like most likely are those that I just mentioned to you before. Most of them are like you cannot build extra house. Obviously, you cannot breach the fence, and you have to pay the maintenance cost and the boundary. You need to share the easement. So I wouldn't say a problem, but I will usually ask my client to pay extra attention. But again, you wouldn't able to find out until the solicitor actually start to go through the title deed. So I would say it's quite difficult from the beginning to spot this issue.
If you imagine 100 properties, let's
Mm,
say we've got 100 transactions,
mm.
and they're all leasehold, they're all two-bedroom terraced houses, they're all in the north of England. Out of those, how many would be problematic?
Um, I wouldn't say it's problem. I think it's rather common. That's the word. Very common and normal to have that kind of restrictive covenant in the houses like that, at least in houses like that. It's very very common, and it's not something like the end of the world. I cannot take it. No, it's not like that. It's rather common. So I wouldn't say problem because it's just common in this country.
So I love percentiles because they mean it. You can kind of quantify things a little bit better. So are you saying
Mm.
in 25% of cases, for example, there are restrictive covenants, which is that a reasonable percentage? 25%?
I would say so. Yes,
Okay. And
very
then
common.
the rest, the other 75% of these leaseholds give you pretty much autonomy to do what you like. Is that roughly it?
Yeah, like I would say so. Yes, but
Okay.
say that you got say that I got like for example I have 40 file open
Hmm.
in May so far, and then 25 files are leasehold, and then the rest are freehold.
Hmm.
And so far for all the leasehold houses that I'm dealing with, they have all a similar. They all have similar issue. They're very similar, but again, it's very very common.
Okay. And
Mm,
the point being then that if you're offering on a leasehold property,
mm,
how much likelihood is there of there being a problem? So let's say out of 10 transactions,
mm.
how many of those transactions are going to be difficult, let's say?
Um, I would say maybe maximum 1 or 2 out of 10, like real problem that we're talking about. For example, like some Asian documents, they're just too old and it's not readable, and we call it default title because I just cannot read it. It's just
Okay.
too old, and it's you're talking about documents that are back to 18th century. And usually that kind of restrictive covenant, I cannot just read it and tell my client what they are because this document itself is simply not readable. And then I will tell my client, look, I cannot tell what's problem we have with in what restriction that we have in this property. So at the end, I will just advise my client to obtain the default title indemnity to cover that. So still that we can resolve this issue. So it's not like problem. But I think majority of my fellowship from Hong Kong, what they see their problem is when when they have done the home survey report, they will focus on the actual condition of the property. They will consider that will be the problem, but not the restrictive covenant.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so I would say for the title deed itself, you cannot change much. Either my client will accept it or they walk away from the deal. So they cannot change it. But from my past experience, like most of my clients from Hong Kong, because I've been dealing with people from Hong Kong in the past 10 years, they will have more concern on the actual condition of the property especially when they buy houses.
Mm.
So the restrictive covenant bit they don't really bother that much. Put it this way.
You mentioned something about indemnity, which
Hmm.
sounds interesting. So is this where you can buy an insurance policy?
Yes,
And can you tell us
yes.
about that?
Well, basically, we have a situation like that. It's rather common for a solicitor to obtain the a defect title indemnity in a situation like we cannot tell what restrictive covenant we have over there. We cannot find out who the landlord is. We cannot find out whether or not there's a ground rent. And then we just basically, after the transaction, obviously, not before. Once my client became the owner of the property, then I would just obtain the insurance for them. So that insurance company will cover, like, oh, what if my client unfortunately breached something that he doesn't know, I couldn't know, so that the insurance will come out and cover that. So it's really, really common, and we have loads of insurance companies are able to help us as well.
And how much are
So
these?
usually we'll
How much are the
maybe like
premiums?
100 to 200 pounds. It's not that expensive. Obviously, it all depends on the value of your property.
Right. And so 100 to 200 pounds, what, a
Yeah,
year or in
for
perpetuity?
life.
Oh, I see. So it's a
Yeah,
one-off acquisition. Right.
exactly,
Got it.
exactly.
Okay. I've noticed how a lot of Hong Kong buyers are very focused on buying freehold properties, and they'll even pay quite a big premium to own a freehold. Now, if you factor in risk into this equation, i.e., I have freehold, I have less risk, I pay more money. I have leasehold, I have higher risk, I pay less money. When you think of that overall equation, how does that work out for you? Do you think that it's not reasonable to pay the freehold premium, as it were, or otherwise?
Um, I must say this is a difficult one because, for example, for myself, I got a house, like freehold house in Greenwich myself, and if that is just personal preference, I would prefer to go for freehold
Hmm.
because it's at the end of the day, it's indefinite period and it's less restriction that I need to deal with, and I don't have to really pay attention on the ground rent and service charges. So it'll be for me personally, it's nothing to do with legal. It's just less hustle, and also because
Yes.
for some people from Hong Kong, my fellowship, they're always living in a place that under leasehold. They never tried freehold before, and all the way from Hong Kong to this country, and I think it would be good for them to experience something different in their life. Especially when they start a new chapter in their life in a different country. And I would say I personally will go for freehold myself.
Interesting. So you'd pay the premium. So if you're a buy, for example, there's owner occupier, which is a different kind of class of thing. But if we'd say as a buy to let investor, if you were doing that, would you rather go freehold or leasehold?
If you're a buy to let, then it will be a different story.
Okay.
Maybe like yeah, either one is okay. I would say
Right.
if you're a buy to let, then it will be different. But if you're buying that for your own, like for your own family,
Yeah.
forget
Yeah.
about investment, then I will go for the free.
That makes sense. Very good. Well, Hosanna, I'm really grateful for you to take the time out to join us. That was
Thank you for the
fascinating.
invitation.
It was really, really helpful. And until next time, investors, good investing.
Thank you.
I hope you found that helpful. And as ever, if you do like, please like. And if you want to see more, then please subscribe. And until next time,